I've labeled this the man's story, mental health. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Michael Tabirade. So outside of my profession, I'm a high performance coach, and usually I focus on what I call self-starters and ambitious professional millennials. But in addition to that, I've worked 11 years within the NHS, primarily in commissioning, contracting, performance management, implementation, working with a diverse range of socioeconomic demographics as well. But for me personally, my focus is heavily on allowing people to understand that they're more than their situation, that they have the ability to actually create success metrics. But of course, that takes time, effort, and energy in order for an individual to do that effectively. So that's a little bit about me, and you can see a bit of my credentials as I go through this as well. So just a brief sort of like content. So I'll give a bit of an introduction, talk about the stories in numbers very briefly as well. I'll talk about what myself and my friends see as the problem, take a deeper look at this, and then we'll summarize it and have a discussion or Q&A if that deems fit. So again, as I stated before, I've worked for the NHS for the past 11 years. So currently a senior implementation manager. And again, within the NHS, I haven't just been focusing on the professional stance. I've been doing a lot of coaching, mentoring, 360 facilitation, action learning set. So I'm very invested in professional and personal development. Outside of that as well, I've been able to self-publish 4 books. So really pretty much around self-development, self-growth, etc., etc. And I do various talks around achievement, behavior, mindset management, etc., etc. Now, I would like a bit of participation, so I'm going to assume that you guys can access the chat. When you look at this individual, what comes to mind? So I'll give you guys about 20 seconds. You can type in the chat any keywords. Again, it'd be really interesting to see what comes to mind. And there's no judgment here at all. Okay, cool. So we've got some sort of like thoughts already. So go to the next slide. What do you think when you see this individual? And again, think about what they may portray to you, certain emotions, thoughts, energy, roles, etc., etc. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to leave it there. Now, it's great that we were able to sort of like throw in our thoughts, but it doesn't say anything about the internal. We made judgments based on our perceptions of this individual based on what we see externally. And so that says a lot about men's mental health in general. There's a lot of preconceptions that occur that don't necessarily examine the internal. And so I kind of want that to be an underlying theme. Now, if we look at some basic stats with regards to mental health, so I've got this from the mentalhealth.org website. So number 1, men report lower levels of life satisfaction than their female counterparts. Now, this specific study doesn't necessarily go into detail in terms of why that is, but for me, I'm questioning, where does that come from? Is that cultural? Is that societal? Is that based on expectations or demands that are on men stereotypically? Who knows? We can discuss that later on. Next thing, men are 3 times more likely to die by suicide. I think within the UK, there are roughly around 6,000 men who commit suicide every single year within the UK. Again, heavily relates to the last point. And there must be an underlying theme in terms of why individuals feel they need to intentionally commit suicide. Third point, men are nearly 3 times as likely to become dependent on alcohol and to report frequent drug use compared to women. Now, we use drugs, alcohol, etc., etc., if we feel like we need to escape as a form of escapism. It's a form of running away. It's a form of running away from our sense of reality because of those burdens that come upon us. So for someone to continuously do that in excess, again, says something about their mental health. And of course, this would insinuate negative mental health because health is an arbitrary term. Next stat, men are more likely to be compulsorily detained or sectioned for treatment. Now, again, this doesn't say anything about the crimes they specifically commit. Of course, we've seen the news lately where 97% of sexual assaults have been committed by men, but this doesn't say anything about, I would say, maybe expectations or targeting or any of those different things that men may go through when it comes to these sorts of things as well. So again, we can explore that in a bit more detail. So only 36% of referrals to the NHS are related to men's therapy. We've heard this many times before. Men don't talk enough. Men don't express themselves, etc., etc. Again, we can discuss that in a bit more detail. And also, related to the second point, men aged 40 to 49 have the highest rates of suicide as well. So they say life begins at 40, but these individuals feel like it doesn't for whatever reason. So again, we can explore this. So when I spoke to Jeremy originally, I thought to myself, what do I talk about? How do I sort of like talk to academics and individuals who are within the field and not tell them stuff they already know? So I decided to go to WhatsApp. So I have a lot of women friends, and very recently I had a conversation with one of my male friends, and we thought we would set up a male group called Manhood. And so I posed the question, what different mental health challenges do you guys go through? And so literally for about 2 or 3 hours, this WhatsApp was just going off. And we had various different things. And so I decided to put it into a word cloud. So you can see things like pressure, society, family, unlearning, damage, etc., etc. Now, to give you some context, a lot of these individuals are quite similar. They are black, heterosexual males, roughly between 28 and 32. So it's roughly that age range. Okay, so it's not a huge pool, but I thought I would share this information nonetheless. So when I broke down this information, this is what I came up with. There was something quite strong about financial expectations, okay? So these financial expectations came into play relating to needing to support family, needing to prevent certain situations happening in the future in relation to parents, as an example, or maybe siblings or children. So financial expectations popped up quite a bit. It was a heavy theme. And there was this responsibility that was born on that individual where they felt like they needed to do more. There was also family-related issues and responsibilities. I alluded to some of those already. So with regards to children, siblings, etc., etc. But a lot of these individuals, because they were the man, so to speak, they needed to perform certain traditional and societal roles. I don't want to say leadership roles because I don't think that's the right term, but there were assumed roles that they needed to fulfill, in their mind at least anyway. There was also this sense of peace and freedom, so they felt quite imprisoned in their situation. This may be the fact that they were at home. This may be in the fact that they're not able to do what they wanted to do because they were trapped in family life. This may be the fact they were in a specific role and it wasn't necessarily what made their heart sing. So they were yearning a sense of freedom. There was also this idea around direction, long-term planning, career, etc., etc., not really feeling like they align to what they're doing at the moment. And again, it's not just men who feel this. Women also feel this too, but these are some of the themes that popped up. There was also something about the pressures of society. And again, this kind of leaks into some of the stuff that we're seeing in the news as well, in terms of how you should be a man, if that is such a thing. And of course, in a very sort of like broad range, the assumption is very much from a heterosexual point of view. What about the other sort of genders as well? We haven't really discussed that in enough detail. So there are different pressures that come into play when these individuals are thinking about manhood. And of course, there are past regrets. And a lot of these past regrets were related to financial activity or related to some form of relationship, whether that was a platonic one or one related to a romantic one. So again, it was almost like I had to think to myself, how did things become this way? So of course, we know there are a range of many different factors. And again, I I'm not necessarily best fit to talk about the psychological aspects, but what I can say is it's definitely a mix of these things. So culture, as an example, from my standpoint, culture is an accumulation of behaviors that a group of individuals submit to, so to speak. It's an agreed set of behaviors and or attitudes and values. And so what has happened is, for many people at least, they feel like they need to submit to a specific way of doing things. But whether their values say they actually need to do that is a different story. So that's an interesting point. There's something about this identity complex, or this idea of a male ego, how things should be, of course, related to culture. And so with this sense of identity, people or men feel like they need to submit to this as well. There's also this idea of not having clear goals. Now, how do you develop clear goals? There are so many different studies on how you set good goals, but we're not necessarily taught that in the workplace necessarily, or in education, or at home, where we actually learn a lot of this stuff. And so there is a basic fundamental principle here in terms of understanding how do you actually plan for your future? How do you actually implement and succeed? I've also written here, seeking validation and short-term pleasure. Now, when I wrote this almost was a diplomatic way of talking about sensual or sexual arousal, talking about even pornography at times. And so there is this desire from a lot of men who actually lean into submitting, seeking that sort of pleasure. And so there is a lack of discipline in that sense as well. And so how does one overcome that? Again, that's another debate that not many people like to expressively talk about. There is also this idea of not being able to speak out or speak up. What platforms, like there's not always a man cave, as an example. What platforms are there to allow men to speak? Okay, so some people may say, well, there are platforms. There are many. But are they directing men in the right way in order for them to feel like there's the right level of psychological safety to express themselves and open up? How does that look like? From a structural point of view, what can be done? They also say that men have poor communication, as I alluded to before. But again, where does that stem from? Being a coach, there's always a way to approach things. So I'd be quite interested to see what you guys think around that. And also this idea of a lack of support. And that is mixed into an array of many different sort of ideas and challenges, etc., etc. So this could be from a family standpoint. Okay, maybe that individual didn't have the right guidance at a young age. There could be a missing father figure as a potential. There could be a missing mother figure as another sort of idea. This could be a poor environment that they were brought up around, etc., etc. So these are some of the things that at least contributed to the manhood group. And if this identifies with you as well, in some degree, then at least I've done my job okay. So in terms of I wouldn't call these solutions, but I would call these things that we can sort of think about. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but I'll probably pick a few. So I'm going to pick one randomly. So taking small steps daily. So again, you saw I spoke about this idea of pressure, okay, that society is putting so much pressure, or this idea that society is putting pressure on us to perform or be a certain way. And that idea has come from this idea of outcome-based goals, thinking about the end state consistently. Now, even though that's a good thing, sometimes that removes us from what is called performance-based goals. In English, really that means sticking to habits daily, small habits. Some of you may be accustomed to the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. He speaks about this quite eloquently. And effectively, it makes more sense to stick to a few set of habits that you stick to every single day. Now, the caveat to that is, rather than having a defined goal each day, maybe have a range. So for example, if I want to sort of pump my chest through press-ups as an example, rather than saying I'm going to do 50, knowing that I can't do 50 every single day, maybe I say, okay, the range is between 10 and 50. I'm eventually going to get bored of 10, but I know I'm going to be motivated enough to actually do 10. So not being ashamed to start small, but work within a range. That's one example. Another example is stop seeking validation. So again, a lot of men's behavior can be, and this is not always the case, can be pushed by the women in their life. Okay, this may be even platonic female friends. This could be obviously their partner or their mother or their siblings. This could be work colleagues. Where that stems from is a complex sort of like discussion. But what I have observed myself is that we do things sometimes to impress other people, especially women as well. And this is not for all men, but this is something that I've observed. And so that strays your values, that strays your sense of character. And that's an underlying theme that I talk about. Your values are what you deem as important to you as an individual. Fundamentally, that's the message here. It's sticking to a sense of values. Now, are your values always right? Maybe in context to you, potentially, yes. I mean, if you mature as an individual, you'll probably set a set of principles which are slightly different. And how do you understand your values? You do this by looking backwards. You look at hallmark experiences in your life, and that gives you a sense of meaning. I think it's Viktor Frankl who talks about this in his logotherapy when he talks about meaning. You look back at your life, you look at your hallmark experiences, and you're able to decipher whether you have a set of preferences. You start to understand what you like and what you don't like and what you're willing to do. And so that is important because it gives us a certain level of resilience and grounding when moving forward as an individual. And in this context, is specific to men as well. Again, we can discuss a bit more of this as I end this because I'm nearing to the end. But essentially, these are some of the things that I think would be quite useful when furthering discussion as well. And so that's pretty much it. I want to leave it up to not just questions, but more of a debate, a discussion, just to really feed in some thoughts and just really have a healthy sort of like debate around this.